bagong news online TV ng bagong milenyo. Millennial Online TV, ang katropa mo sa pagbabalita.
Hanap mo ba ay unwind ventures? Tara nang mamangha sa mga tanawin. Ano man ang iyong travel goals? Dadalhin namin kayo. Sa unwind ventures at saya. Dito lang sa Wow Biyahe. Kaya wow, di ba?
Abangan dito lang sa Millennial Online TV.
Barangay, pangunahing unit ng pamahalaan lokal kung saan dito pinag-uusapan ang bawat sigalot ng mga residente ng bawat barangay. Dito rin pinag-uusapan ng mga piling halal na opisyal na barangay ang mga proyekto para sa kanilang barangay. Kumustahin natin ang panunungkulan ni Kapitan dito sa Dama Barangay sa Millennial Online TV worldwide, ang katropa ng bawat barangay.
Ating tinatapos ang ating pagpupulong. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pagdalo at tapos na po ang ating session. Enjoy na po tayo.
Mga pangyayaring naganap sa ating kapaligiran, mga balita sa buong linggo, ihimayin, iisa-isahin, dito sa Balitaktakan, aarangkada, kasama si Brian Enyosa, dito lang sa Millennial Online TV. Okay, nako mga kaibigan, magandang hapon at nagbabalik po ulit ang Millennial Online TV, siyempre sa aming year-end special. At siyempre kanina, si Randel ang kasama natin, tsaka yung Vice Mayor na tatakbo sa Montalban Rizal. At siyempre si Consial Ambet Bautista ng Malabon. At ngayon po, abay makakapiling natin ang ninong ng buong taga Malabon. Buong taga Malabon. At ito'y isa, at ito'y binigyan ng award kailan lang ng Vice Mayor of the Year. Ito'y buong Pilipinas, kung di ako nagkakamali. Si Vice Mayor Ninong de la CRUZ. Magandang hapon sa Ninong.
Magandang hapon po, Kabitoy. At magandang hapon po sa lahat po ng mga ka-Millennial TV po natin na nandyan nanonood.
Ayun. So yan mga kaibigan, kaya buti pinagbigyan tayo ni Vice Mayor Ninong de la CRUZ kasi medyo na-intriga lang ako dahil sa dami-dami ng Vice Mayor, siya ang napiling bilang Vice Mayor of the Philippines, no? At talagang hindi basta naman iginagawad yun ika nga deserving talaga sa kanya. Ngayon, tanungin muna natin, Ninong, kasi sinasabi ng taga Malabon ay ninong namin si Ninong de la CRUZ. Ibig sabihin, bakit ka ba kinawag na ninong ng buong taga Malabon?
May nagbansag lang sa akin. Actually, si Ome Santos.
Parang kilala ko si Ome.
Opo. Bali, ang nangyari po noon meron kaming Saturday Club. Ngayon po, every Saturday, nagkikita-kita kami, may konting, alam mo na, may konting inuman. At pagka, nung nagkataon sunod-sunod na Sabado, niyayaya ako pag araw ng linggo, ang sinasabi ko sa kanila, pasensya na, magaan ako sa Midyag bukas.
Ayun. So, yun ang laging dahilan mo.
Opo. Tapos, minsan, pumunta kami sa isang lugar, sa Barangay San Agustin, sa amin sa Malabon. Ang nangyari po ay mga bata, sinasabi, ninong ko yan. So lahat nagsasabi ng ninong ko yan. Sisigaw yung mga bata ng ninong, ninong, ninong.
Ayun.
Kaya sabi sa akin, tama, dapat pala, ninong pala ayaw mo. So doon nagsimula. Pero hindi pa ako politiko noon.
Oo, alam
Hindi
ko.
pa po,
Hindi
hindi
pa.
pa po. That was 2001. Ako po tumakbo noong 2004.
Ayun. So sa makatwid, sa dami ng kumukuha sa yung ninong, kaya nabasagan ka ng ninong.
Opo.
Ayun.
Ayun.
Okay, so ngayon, ninong na rin tawag ko ha. Bakit naisipan mong sumabak sa politika na okay naman ang buhay mo, marangya naman? Bakit naisipan mong sumabak sa politika? Meron bang ibang dahilan?
Magandang tanong yan, Kapitoy, kasi sa lahi namin, wala naman pong naging
Politiko.
pumasok sa paglilingkuran.
Oh, yun nga eh.
Ako lamang po ang nangahas na pumasok dito sa larangang to. Well, ang dahilan po kasi ang daming humihingi sa akin ng tulong noong mga panahon na yon. At sabi sa akin ng mga kaibigan ko, tumakbo ko na lang ng konsihal. O kaya kagawad, o kaya barangay captain. Mas marami tayong matutulungan.
Ayun. So, doon nagsimula.
Doon na nagsimula.
So, hindi ka ba nagdalawang isip na gagastos lang ako dito, etc.? Hindi ka ba nag-isip ng gano'n nung sumaba ka?
Hindi eh. Siyempre, kailangan pagka mag-desisyon ka, yun na yun eh. Once you decide, go for it. Focus na.
Ayun.
Ganun po.
Oo. So, ang una mong tinakbo sa larangan ng politika is vice mayor na ba agad?
Hindi, konsihal muna po.
Konsyal.
Opo, konsyal
So,
muna.
ikaw ba'y naluklok nun? Noong time na yon?
Ganito po ang nangyari sa akin. 2004, tumakbo po ako. Hindi po ako nanalo.
Konsyal.
Konsihal. 2007, tumakbo uli ako.
Oh.
Malapit na katotohanan. Hindi ako sinalo.
Hindi uli.
2010, tumakbo uli ako.
Konsyal pa rin yon.
Konsihal pa rin yun. Ayun. Muntik na.
Muntik na.
Muntik na.
So, isang puntos na lang. Oh.
Nakatatlong talo ako. Bago ako nanalo.
Pero teka,
Noong 2013.
yon, sa tatlong term na konsyal na tumakbo ka, natalo ka, pero ba't sa vice mayor, bigla kang ayun? Kasi, konsyal lang, hindi ka nga nanalo eh. Pero sa vice mayor, ayun ka?
Hindi nanalo kong vice mayor din.
Oo nga.
Tatlo kong laban, talo po akong konsihal.
Oh, konsyal.
Pagkatapos po noong 2013, siguro naawa na yung mga kababayan ko.
Oh.
Ay, nanalo po akong konsihal.
Ayun, so nanalo kang
Nanalo na
konsyal.
ako
Ayun.
2016, tumakbo uli ako, doon ako nag-number 1.
Na councilor.
Na councilor.
Ayun.
2019, tumakbo akong vice mayor, nanalo po ako.
So napakarami mo palang dinaanan.
Opo, talagang pagsubok.
Oo. So, eto na, Vice. Ayan, nanalo ka na as Vice Mayor ng Malabon. Ano ang isinaisip mo, isinapuso mo nung umupo ka na as Vice Mayor? Ano ang gagawin mo at una mong gagawin para sa Malabonians?
Actually, siguro itutuloy ko na lang yung ginawa ko dati. Kasi nung unang termino ko, ang nangyari po kasi, ang ospital po ng Malabon noon ay namumroblema kami dahil may bayad. So, pag-upo ko, gumawa po tayo ng paraan. Nilakasan ko po yung loob kong pumunta ng Malacanang, pinuntahan ko si Senator Bongo. At tayo po yung humiling ng isang malasakit center para sa ospital ng Malabon. Para nang sa ganun, ang mga hospital bill ng mga kababayan po natin ay talagang wala silang bayaran. Pero siyempre, meron pa rin mga ibang konti-konting babayaran tulad ng mga gamot, mga swero. Ayun po, patalit ng doktor, hindi naman po kasali yun doon. Kaya, humiling pa po ako ng pondo sa ating pong Pangulo, kay Presidente Rodrigo Duterte, na ako'y gumawa ng liham, paghingi ng pondo. At nabigyan naman po tayo, 5 milyon buwan-buwan.
Ang binigay?
Ang ibinigay para sa ospital ng Malabon.
Aba, magmula kailan yun? Nagsimula?
Well, 2019, bago pa magpandemya, kaya ang ganda naman nangyari dahil nung nagpandemya, lahat po ng na-hospital sa ospital ng Malabon, halos walang binayaran.
Ayun. So, alam mo, bukod dyan, Vice Mayor, ako rin nabigla ako sa'yo, na alam ko nga dati natalo ka, doon naluklok ka. Parang iba yung naging arangkada mo eh. Dahil nakita ko, meron kang isang food caravan na umiikot sa buong Malabon.
Ay, ikaw po. Araw-araw yun.
Ayun nga.
Araw-araw.
So, ang pinakakain mo sa araw-araw sa buong barangay, ilang katao yun?
500 katao po.
Araw-araw yun?
Araw-araw. Pero schedule yan, Lunes. Sabi, adobo. Pagdating ng di pala, Lunes, lugaw.
Lugaw.
Ngayon, ang katuwang ko dyan, yung pinsan ko, yung may lugawan, siya nagluluto, Eko's lugaw.
Ayun.
Eko's lugaw. Pag Martes, adobo. Okay? Miyerkules, kuminsan yung bopis. Kuminsan naman, may halong dinuguan. Partner yan eh. Pagdating ng Webes, pansit naman, pansit kanton.
Ayun, oo.
Pagdating ng Biyernes, alam na natin lahat yan, munggo.
Iyon. Okay, so yung mga set mo ng ulam na yon, kanin, etc. Bawat araw na yun, iba-ibang barangay.
Opo, ang tinatarget kong bigyan, yung talagang kawawa talaga, yung mga nasa laylayan sa tabing ilog.
Mga poorest of the poor.
Poorest of the poor, nasa laylayan, ika nga.
Ganon. So, yun talaga. Sa bagay, wala naman akong nakita na yung iba, bakit si Ninong doon lang nagpapakain dito. Hindi. So, naiintindihan nila.
Hindi lahat, inikot ko. Lahat.
Hindi, I mean, yung sinasabi mo nga, nasa laylayan, siyempre, sila lang ang talagang dapat unahin. Sila talaga ang mahirap ang buhay.
Yes, pero ganun pa man, meron pa rin portion nilalagay. Halos lahat po.
Halos lahat.
Buong Malabon po.
Sa bagay, may nakita rin ako. Minsan nakakain ako nung pinadala mo nun eh. Hindi ako nagkakamali, adobo yun eh.
Opo.
So nakakain ako. Saan galing to? Kay Vice yan. Ha? Ako hanggang dito pala. So nakakain ako. Ngayon, Vice, yung mga pagpapakain mo na yan, yan ba ay pondo ng Vice o sarili mo?
Hindi po. Ito po ay galing po sa sarili po nating bulsa, sa sweldo natin.
Ayun.
Yan. At meron pong mga ilan-ilan na tumutulong.
Ayun, mga sponsor din kahit paano.
Hindi naman po sponsor pagka
Naisipan
naisipan lang nilang
Ayun.
tumulong.
Ayun.
Tulad po nung pinsan ko, si Jeremy de la Cruz. Yan. Tumutulong po yan. Tumulong din sa akin yung sa kaibigan ko, si Alvin Chris.
Oo, si Kapitan.
Kapitan Alvin Chris, minsan po, magbigay ng tulong yan. Yeah.
Ano ba yan? Kamag-anak mo rin ba si Kapitan Alvin Chris?
Hindi po, kaibigan.
Ayun. Actually, alam niyo mga kaibigan, si Ninong de la Cruz, dahil nung una kami nagkakilala, napakasimpleng tao, hindi mo nga titignan politiko. Lalo na ha, kung makikita mo sa bayan to, nagtataga ng baboy ron, hindi mo siya sasabing, Vice Mayor ko, ikaw ang mamimili. Di ba? Totoo ba yung Vice?
Opo.
Ngayon, paano mo nahahati yung buhay mo as Vice Mayor, tsaka yung sa hanap buhay mo, kasi madaling araw, nagpupunta ka na ng bayan nagtataga ka na paano mo nahahati? Madaling araw, nandun ka, o hating gabi, tapos umaga, duty ka as Vice Mayor, hindi ka ba nahihirapan, o ang misis mo, hindi ba pumasok-pasok ka kasi dyan mga ganon, wala bang ganon?
Pagka gusto, may paraan. Kapag ayaw, maraming dahilan.
Ayun, sa bagay. Pero, katulad yan, anong oras ka nandun sa bayan para nag-iintindi ka ng hanap buhay mo? At after that, anong oras ka papasok na sa munisipyo? Alam mo, mag-aboy-baboy ka doon, maliligo ka muna.
Ganito po ang schedule ko sa madaling araw po.
Ayan
Alas
na.
12:30.
Oh,
Kailangan nandun na po ako sa slaughterhouse.
ayun.
Pagtungtong po ng mga alas 3, naghahatid po ako sa asawa ko sa palengke.
Ayun.
Pagtungtong ng alas 4:30, uwi ako, matutulog naman ako.
Ayun.
Opo.
So,
4:30 tulog, gising uli ako ng 6:30. 2 oras tulog.
Ayun. Tapos, gagaya ka na.
Gayak na, pupunta na ako ng
Munisipyo.
mga schedule po natin araw-araw.
Ayun. So, bukod dyan sa food caravan mo, Ninong, noong pandemic, ano ba ang nagawa ni Ninong de la Cruz sa mga Malabonians? At alam ko, hindi lang sa Malabonians, parang may narinig ako, kahit hindi taga Malabon, parang humingi yata ng tulong sa'yo. Ano ang mga nagawa natin ng pandemic?
Nung nagdeklara po ng lockdown si Pangulo, si Presidente Rodrigo Roa Duterte, nako, yun po yung panahon na lahat po natulala. Kasi, alam naman natin, marami pong kababayan natin walang trabaho.
Correct.
Nung nag-lockdown, inatasan ng Pangulo ang lahat na wag magtrabaho, magstay sa bahay. Problema natin, pagkain.
Yun pa.
At nung nag-lockdown, hindi natin alam kung kailan bubuksan.
Yun pa.
Yun ang kaya ang nag-usap kami ni Mayor Lelen Oreta, ang nangyari po, pwede ba hinaan natin ito konti?
Sige.
Para hindi ako na nadidistract. Thank you.
Okay, sige.
Nung nag-lockdown, usap kami ni Mayor, alam naman po natin, hindi ka pwede maglabas ng budget kapag hindi kasama doon sa tinatawag na AIP. Okay. Yung annual, yung sa budget po.
Sa budget ng...
Dahil lahat yan nakadetalyado bago ilabas. No? Paano kung ilalabas para sa pagpapakain ng tao?
Hindi pa po pwedeng, Vice, hindi po pwedeng i-switch?
Ginawa po ng paraan namin ni Mayor yan. At talagang inayos namin sa council sa pinakalegal na paraan. At pinakamabilis na proseso para na sa maipamahagi agad sa tao.
Ayun. So sa mga tweet, hindi pa nagbibigay ng ayuda ang national government, inumpisahan na ng Malabon.
Tama po.
Ayun, yun ang sinasabi ko.
Opo. At ako po ang naatasang magdala sa mga barangay. Si Consial Enzo Oreta.
Oo.
Si Consial Enzo Oreta naatasan sa District 1, ako naman po ay naatasan sa District 2 magbigay. Opo.
Nakita kita that time, Ninong, nakita ko nga, ikaw ang nagdadala sa mga barangay
Opo.
na mga food packs,
Opo.
etc. Ngayon, katulad nga no, so na-switch niyo yung budget, wala pang binibigay ng national government. Hindi ba dumating sa punto na ikaw, si Mayor Lenlen Oreta, ay naglabas din ng sarili niyong pera para sa Malabon?
Siyempre po.
Ayun.
Dahil hindi naman po ganun kabilis eh.
Ayun.
Opo, hindi po. Tulad, pag-usapan na lang po natin yung opisina ko.
Oh, okay.
Ang opisina ko po, walang pondo para sa ayuda, walang budget para sa donasyon, walang budget para sa pamimigay na tulong sa tao. Wala po.
Wala.
Ano ginawa ko? Kumatok po tayo sa mga pintuan ng mga senador, ng mga kaibigan po natin.
Ayun.
At nakatutuwa po na meron pong 4 na senador na agad-agad po na nagbigay po ng tulong.
Ayun. Ay, pwede ba natin banggitin kung sino
Opo,
senador?
pwede. Hindi naman sila kumakandidato eh.
Sige.
Yung isa nga nag-withdraw eh. Si Senator Bongo, number 1 yan.
Ayun. Hindi talaga Senator Bongo mahusay.
Si Senator Bongo po kasi talagang sobrang bait niyan. Hindi pa yan politiko. Ganun din po ako. Hindi pa ako politiko. Nakilala ko na yung tao na yan. Idol talaga yan. Sobrang susipag. Sobrang bait. Kaya nung nagkaroon ng pandemya, tawag agad ako sa kanya. Senator Bongo, kung ano pa pwede. At antimano po, nagbigay po ng tulong sa ating mga kababayan. So, yun po, ginawa ko, nirepack ko po iyon. At pinamahagi po sa ating mga kababayan sa Malabon.
Ayun.
Then, si Senador Bato de la Rosa.
Si General Bato.
Kala nyo lang po, tahimik yung tao na yun. Ako, napakabait nun. At talagang, antimano, nagbigay po ng pambili ng mga pagkain. No? At si Senator Tolentino. Yan.
Si Francis.
Si Senator Francis Tolentino, saludo po ako sa tao na yan. Napaka, sabihin nating, maagap sa pagtulong sa mga kababayan nating Malabon yan.
Ayun.
Opo.
Saya mga kaibigan, naririnig nyo. Ako kasi, bigla rin ako nabigla kay Ninong na dati, hindi naman nga siya ganun. Biglang ngayon, eto na siya. Ngayon, doon po sa kanyang magpapagal, no, sa kanyang mga ginagawa bilang public servant, nabigyan po siya ng isang parangal na Vice Mayor of the Philippines, no. Lahatan po ito. Ngayon, at tanong ko, Ninong, yung bang pagbibigay siya ng award na yon, dumaan ba sa mga kailangan, meron silang mga tawag ito, yung batayan para gawin kang Vice Mayor of the Philippines, number 1.
Actually, ano po yun? Honorary Vice Mayor of the Year. 5 ho kami dyan. Pero may kategorya.
Ayun, yun nga.
May mga kategorya. So, sa atin po, ang kategorya po dahil sa kahit na may pandemya, tuloy-tuloy ang infrastruktura ng Malabon, tuloy-tuloy ang mga proyekto na ipagagawa, naging mabilis at pinakamarami po tayo ng mga dumaan sa ating ordinance at resolution na naipasa.
Ayun.
Lalong-lalo na po noong pandemic. Kumbaga, hindi po na-delay. At wala po tayong absent, Yun lang po. Wala tayong absent.
Oo.
At saka, talagang, ang ating mga konsihal, talagang mahal tayo niyan dahil pantay-pantay po ang turing natin sa kanila.
Oo. At yun nga mga kaibigan, sabi ko nga sa inyo, sa Malabon, sabi nga, may nagsabi lang sa akin, Vice, kung sininong daw tatakbong mayor, sure win.
Naku!
Hindi. Iyon sinabi lang. Hindi, alam ko naman.
Wala pa sa isipan natin yan. Sabi to eh.
Hindi. Ito, ang nagsasabi lang sa akin yan kasi merong pribado, merong politiko rin na mga galing barangay. So, yun lang ang sinasabi nila. Dahil, bakit? Dahil nakita nga nila yung mga ginawa mo magmula nung hindi pa man pandemic, hanggang sa nag-pandemic, hanggang ngayon. Ngayon, sa ginawa mong yan, Ninong, sa pag-iikot mo, lalo nung pandemic, hindi ka ba natakot dahil may COVID na mahawa ka, magkaroon ka, at after that, mahawa pamilya mo?
Hindi yun, kasi naniniwala ko, ang Diyos ang may hawak ng lahat. Pag siya ang nagbukas ng libro mo, siya rin po ang magsasara.
Sa bagay nga. Pero ibig sabihin nga, sa sarili mo, misis mo, hindi ba ikaw sinabi ng misis mo na, Ninong, pumirmis ka muna rito, nakakatakot, baka pati mamaya, pati kami.
Ingat din, siyempre, paglabas ng bahay, kailangan armado ng vitamina at sapat na tulog bago lumabas ng bahay. At pagpasok ng bahay, dapat maligo muna bago Sumama sa pamilya. Yung panahon na yun.
Oo. Pero tingin ko parang hindi sapat ang tulog mo dahil nandun ka sa slaughterhouse, uuwi ka sa inyo, so 2 oras ang tulog, duty ka as vice mayor kasi nakita ko yan nung napunta ka sa office mo, nandun ka on time. Paano, hindi eksakto tulog mo?
Ano po, Kabitoy, sanay na yung katawan ko kasi bata pa lang po ako. Yun na po ang routine ng oras sa ng aking tulog. Madaling araw talaga gising na ako.
Ayun, naku,
Opo.
napakahirap. Okay, so teka mga kaibigan, ha? Magbabalik lang po kami ni Vice Mayor at marami pa akong itatanong sa kanya dahil ngayon lang siya nagpakita talaga at nagpabigay ng paunlak para ma-interview natin dito. Mamaya magbabalik po kami uli.
Pinaigting, pinalakas, ang bagong news online TV ng bagong milenyo. Millennial Online TV, ang katropa mo sa pagbabalita.
Nais mo bang guminhawa ang iyong pakiramdam? Kung ikaw ay may sipon, ubo, lagnat at iba pang nararamdaman, lalo na ang sakit ng katawan, narito na ang Yasmag Magnesium Therapy Oil. Ang Yasmag Magnesium Therapy Oil ay nakatutulong na ibsan ang iyong nararamdaman sa pamamagitan ng pagpahid sa apektadong parte ng katawan, gaya ng noo, balikat, tuhod at kung anuman ang masakit na parte ng iyong katawan. Panoorin ang mga testimonials ng gumamit ng Yasmag.
Yan po, ginagamit niya. Siya po ay isa sa aking mga testimony.
Ako, si Destino Francisco, ay gumagamit ng Yasmag na siyang nakapagpalakad sa akin. Kaya kayo, mga kaibigan ko at kakilala, ay pinapayuhan kong gumamit ng product na ito.
Isa sa ating testimony, ikukwento po niya sa inyo yung kanyang result nung siya ay 1 linggo nang nilalagnat at giniginaw ng hihina.
Hi, ako po si Rina Liliantos, 29 years old, taga Sariaya, Quezon po. Nangyari po sa akin, itong mga nakaraang araw po ay hindi ko po maintindihan yung pakiramdam ko, gawa pong ang sakit po sobra ng likod ko, nilalagnat ako, tapos po ay hindi lang po 1 linggo ang nararamdaman ko. Simula po nung July 30 hanggang itong araw, hanggang nung mga nakaraang araw. Yun lang po, nawala lang po ng dahil sa magnesium.
Paano ginawa mo?
Ang ginawa lang po sa akin ay ipinahinaplas po sa akin likod kung saang parte ng katawan ang masakit. Tapos po ay hinilot lang po ako. At hanggang po pagpawisan ako sa pagkahilot na may magnesium. Ayun lang po, sunod-sunod po ang paglagay kung saan banda ang may masakit. At yun nga po, ilang araw lang sa paggamit yun ng magnesium, ako mismo, sarili ko, ramdam ko ang pagbabago sa aking katawan. Dahil po simula nga po nung July 30 hanggang itong itong mga nakaraang araw lang, hindi ako halos makatayo dahil sa sobrang sakit ng aking likod.
Ako po si Leslie. First time ko po mag-try nitong Yasmag Magnesium Therapy. Ang una ko pong naramdaman ay ang bango niya lang hapin, nakaka-relax ng katawan, and then yung sakit na iniinda ko sa puso, yung sakit-sakit, wala naman ako sakit sa puso, pero yung mga kirot-kirot nawala niya, instant nawala, na tagal ko nang iniinda. And then hindi siya malagkit ipahid.
Okay mga kaibigan, nagbabalik ko kami ulit ni Vice Mayor Ninong de la Cruz. Ito, medyo merong pupuntahan pa rin kasi si Vice Mayor, kaya isa na lang ang huling itatanong ko. Mayor, ngayon ay may panibago na naman serye.
Vice Mayor.
Vice Mayor pala. Nadudulas tuloy ako. Vice Mayor lang, Vice. Kita ko, napopromote ko. Ngayon, Vice, ito na naman, meron na naman serye na eleksyon. Itong serye na eleksyon na to, pwede bang malaman siya, kumustahin natin? Ano na ba sitwasyon ngayon na dadating na naman na eleksyon? Meron bang mga... Kasi alam mo, sa mga nakaraan, sa Malabon, meron mga pangyayari ng eleksyon, nagkaroon ng mga heinous crime, na sinasabi politika. Ngayon ba, meron mga banta ba ng gano'n na malalagay na naman ang Malabon sa hotspot?
As of this moment, parang wala.
Parang wala.
Parang wala. Maayos ang ang tingin ko lang. Hindi magiging magulo.
Ayun.
Opo.
So ngayon, Vice, ano ang iyong mensahe sa mga Malabonians ngayong eto na naman tayo at hindi pa rin tapos ang pandemya? At alam ko, meron pang mga hindi nakakapagpabakuna rin. Ano mabibigay niyong mensahe para sa mga Malabonians para sa kaligtasan din ng lahat at hindi na magka-problema?
Huwag po matakot sa bakuna. Meron pa rin pong mga kababayan natin dyan na baka raw maging zombie sila. Hindi ho totoo yun.
Ayun.
Huwag ho maniwala doon. Ako nung una po medyo hindi na ako naniniwala pero kailangan kong ako ang unang magpabakuna
Ayun.
para makita ng mga tao. Pero ang nangyari, gusto ko mauna, hindi pala pwede.
Oh.
Kaya nahuli pa rin kami. Nung natapos, frontliner na, at saka pa lang po kami nagpabakuna.
Ayun.
Opo.
Okay, so, Vice, katulad yan, hindi nyo ba naisipan na, halimbawa, marami pang hindi nagpapabakuna sa taga Malabon, hindi ba pumasok sa isip nyo, sige, yung mga magpapabakuna, merong magiging regalo o gift, tulad ng ginagawa ng ibang bayan o lungsod?
Actually, yung bagay na yan, napag-uusapan po namin.
Aha.
Opo. Pero siyempre, kanya-kanya po ng diskarte ang bawat LGU.
Mhm.
So, dito naman po sa Malabon, kaya po naging konti na po ngayon ang kaso ng COVID, o aktibong kaso ng COVID-19
Correct.
dahil sa pamamalakad po ng lokal na pamahalaan, ang mga tao ay sumusunod.
Na magpabakuna sila.
Hindi lang po sa pagbabakuna, pati sa health protocols, sumusunod po ang ating
Sa
mga
bagay,
kabayan.
totoo nga yun.
Opo.
Oo. Tapos, ewan ko, Vice, kung ito programa rin ng lokal na pamahalaan. Meron kasi ako nakita mga nag-post na binigyan ng parang ayuda dahil nagpabakuna sila bilang pasasalamat.
Sa amin ba yun?
Malabon, oo. Hindi sa barangay mo, pero sa parting Malabon na hindi ko alam kung ito ay strategy ng barangay o ng lokal na pamahalaan na hinihikayat magpabakuna yung hindi nagpabakuna at yung nagpabakuna, binigyan nila na parang ayuda bilang pasasalamat lang. Oo.
Okay. Di maganda.
Ayun.
Maganda po. Opo. Ganun po ang nangyari. Opo. Pero ngayon po, ang hiling ko lang po sa mga kababayan ko na mga hindi pa nagpapabakuna, magpabakuna na. Mahirap na. Yun ngang mga nabakunahan, tinamaan.
Correct. Oh.
Paano pa kaya yung mga hindi bakunado? Diba, Kapitoy? Kaya kailangan magpabakuna na po lahat. Yun po, kahilingan natin.
Ayun. So, isa na lang, last na to, Vice, about do sa mga ayuda, sa mga Malabonians. Kasi kung maaalala nyo, actually, ako talaga naging utak noon. Hindi man utak, kundi nung nagkaroon ng isang payout sa bayan-bayanan, parang nawala social distancing, nag-volume ang tao. Ngayon ba, mayroon pa bang problema dyan sa bigayan ng mga ayuda sa atin, sa Malabon?
Wala naman. Sa ngayon, wala po. Wala po. Kasi nung mga panahon na yun, alam naman po natin, ang tao talaga nun, talaga mainit ang ulo eh.
Dahil
maayos ang sistema ginagawa, pero nagagalit. Dahil siyempre, una, natatakot na eh. Natatakot, baka walang makain. Dahil ilang araw pa yung yung wala silang trabaho.
Correct, oo.
Alam mo, kasama yan sa mga psychologically affected ang tao ng mga panahon ng pandemic.
Kaya nga eh.
Kaya yung masasabi kong pandemic na ito, na naging bangungot sa bawat isa.
Correct.
Ayoko nung maranasan to. Ang hirap. Ang hirap. Yun nga pong mga kaibigan ko na mga may pera, pag nakakwentuhan ko, nag-usap kami, nagre-reklamo, paano pa kaya yung mga nasa mga laylayan na talaga walang-wala?
Paano na gagawin?
Paano na? Diba? Kaya magdasal po ang lahat na naway mawala na po ang kalaban nating hindi nakikita na coronavirus. Mawala na. Ang pandemya matigil na. At sana po yung face mask po natin, no, na buti nila medyo malayo-layo tayo.
Malayo tayo talaga.
Kaya kailangan talaga yan tuluyan ng mawala. Kasi habang inaatasan tayo ng pamahalaan na mag-face mask, ibig sabihin nandyan pa rin siya.
Ayun. Ito, Vice, dadating ang Pasko, pagsalubong sa bagong taon. Ano ba ang advisory ng lokal na pamahalaan sa mga residente ng Malabonians ngayon sasalubong sa ganyan?
Sa mga simbahan po, nandyan po ang mga police, mga enforcer po natin. Sila pa rin po ang naggagabay sa mga tao, sa mga kababayan natin na huwag masyadong magdikit-dikit. Nandun pa rin po yun.
Social distancing.
Social distancing pa rin po. Kaya lang siyempre, kung libo yung kababayan natin, ilan lang po yung ating kawani.
Oo, correct.
Kaya kung minsan hindi po natin makita lahat, Di ba?
So dapat magka-disiplina rin ng mga tao.
Disiplinado naman ng Malabon.
Ayun.
Opo.
Okay, so yan mga kaibigan, yan na yung ilang mga papyaw namin dahil si Ninong meron pupunta pa. Alam niyo, maraming schedule si Ninong. Ito nga yung tinatawag nila sa Malabon na small but terrible. So, yun. Okay, so Ninong, yun ba ang last word mo na sa mga taga Malabon? Ano pa ang last word mo ngayong darating ang Pasko at Bagong Taon? Yun na lang last word.
Naway ang ating syudad at kayo na ating mga kababayang Malabonian magkaroon ng kalakasan ng katawan, malayo sa sakit, malayo sa kapahamakan, marami pang biyaya ang dumating sa ating buhay. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Maraming salamat.
Ayun. Okay, so mga kaibigan, yan po si Vice Mayor Ninong de la Cruz ng Malabon at siyempre, siya ulit ang magiging Vice Mayor sa susunod na termino. No? Dahil wala namang iba. Wala namang ibang Vice Mayor na po pwede, kundi siya lang talaga. No? So okay mga kaibigan, sa susunod, iuupo ulit natin si Vice dito, siguro after elections na. No? Dahil ngayon, busy to, maraming inaasik. Hindi na nga umuwi sa bahay halos to. Uuwi lang, maliligo, at aalis na ulit. Okay? So mga kaibigan, maraming salamat sa inyong pagsubaybay sa amin ni Vice Mayor Ninong de la Cruz at hanggang sa susunod po. Magbabalik po kami.
Thank you very much.
Pinaigting, pinalakas ang bagong news online TV ng bagong milenyo. Millennial Online TV, ang katropa mo sa pagbabalita.
Mga katropa, ako ang inyong lingkod, Brian Anyosa. Samahan po ninyo ako sa panibago nating programa dito sa Millennial Online TV, ang Balitaktakan, kung saan pag-uusapan natin ang lahat ng mga balitang bumabandera sa isang buong linggo at mga impormasyong dapat ninyong malaman. Paano kami mapanood? I-type lang sa inyong mga Facebook at YouTube account ang Millennial Online TV. Ano pang hihintay mo, katropa? Like, subscribe, at share na! Mga katropa, ako po si Randel Villados, ang online naranista ng bagong milenyo ng Millennial Online TV, na nag-aanyaya sa inyo na makikanta, makisaya, at tumutok sa lahat ng programa ng Millennial Online TV. I-type lamang sa inyong Facebook at YouTube ang Millennial Online TV. Nood na mga katropa!
Mga katropa, ako po si Gazi Sarip, ang inyong tagapaghatid ng balita sa bagong milenyo, na nag-aanyaya sa inyo na tunghayan ang aking mga pag-uulat at tumutok sa lahat ng programa dito sa Millennial Online TV. I-type lamang sa inyong Facebook at YouTube ang Millennial Online TV. Nood na mga katropa!
Mga katropa, ako po inyong lingkod, si Rosel Lopez, ang inyong katropa, ang inyong kabarangay ng bagong milenyo. Abangan po ang aking mga tatalakayin na mga kaganapan dito sa ating bansa. At syempre, abangan nyo rin ang gagawin nating pangungumusta sa panunungkulan ni Kapitan sa ating Dalaw Barangay. At syempre, ay tunghayan nyo po ang lahat ng programa ng Millennial Online TV. I-type lamang po sa inyong mga cellphone sa Facebook at YouTube, Millennial Online TV. Okay mga katropa? Pinaigting, pinalakas ang bagong news online TV ng bagong milenyo. Millennial Online TV, ang katropa mo sa pagbabalita.
Let us all see the other side of a researcher's life.
This is my story, and I share.
I would never imagine that 38 years later.
Stories can change lives positively.
Pahalagahan natin ang bigas. Ito ay buhay.
I explore the oceans for beneficial bacteria.
We love personal stories.
Be the best version of yourself. Always.
Read a lot
and write a lot.
Makikilala ka sa husay at galing mong angkin.
This is my story.
This is my story.
This is my story and I share.
B2B, back to basic.
Did you know that basic research is your ticket to advanced or new research areas? Increasing the appreciation of science through the NRCP's B2B TV and online pitch is NRCP's contribution to enhancing science culture in the Philippines.
Basic research go along the way and even in the front line of every research journey. It involves an assorted blending of an enormous range of skills and activities. Welcome to BUSD NRCP's Back to Basic or B2B online classes series.
In almost every technology that we use every day, basic science and math are working behind the scenes.
This is NRCP's new program where our scientists, artists, and experts will explain concepts in basic science.
Bear in mind that basic research does not have to be basic in the simplest sense of the word. It is something that we want you all to redefine to make it more attuned and relevant to the needs of our time.
Bilang ama ng kagawaran ng agham at teknolohiya, masasabi kong napakahalaga ang pagsasaliksik. Ito ang pundasyon ng maliit man o malaking hakbangin sa mundo ng pagtuklas. Kasing halaga ng paglinang ng kaalaman, ang pakikipag-ugnayan sa iba't ibang grupo. Ang lahat ng ito ay patungo sa iisang layunin, ang paghubog sa kamalayan ng bayan patungo sa pag-unlad.
Are you a young Filipino researcher interested in publishing your work? Are you a budding NRCP scientist intending to present your findings to local and global audiences? If so, you have come to the right place. The National Research Council of the Philippines is proud to announce the Research Dissemination in Local and International Platforms, or RD-LIP Financial Grants. Under the Basic Research Information Translation for Empowerment in the Regions program, or BRIGHTER, the RD-LIP financial grants aim to promote a science culture in the regions. More importantly, the RD-LIP financial grants provide opportunities for NRCP members to share their research results and expand their horizons locally and abroad. NRCP offers two RD-LIP financial grants: the financial grant for paper presentation in international and local conferences, and the financial grant for publication in ISI or Scopus Index journals. The financial grant for paper presentation in international and local conferences offers support in disseminating research results to the general public and to a global audience. This allows NRCP members to be updated on the latest developments in their fields of specialization and establish mutually beneficial partnerships with international researchers. On the other hand, the financial grant for publication in ISI or Scopus Index journals intends to support expenses for publication of research papers in ISI or Scopus Index journals. This grant is limited to 10 NRCP members and is a first-come, first-served basis. Financial grants are now open to all budding NRCP members. Log in and submit your applications with the required documents online at the NRCP website. Use NRCP's pre-evaluation checklist for paper presentation and publication grants to guide you. Visit the NRCP RD-LIP website or Research Pod on Facebook for more information.
Lumaki ako sa isang pamayanan na buhay ang kultura at likas yaman. Nahubog ako sa kamalayan na malaki o maliit mang bagay ay mahalaga. Dahil sa tulong ng National Research Council of the Philippines, ahensya ng kagawaran ng agham at teknolohiya, ang tila maliit na hakbangin sa pagsasaliksik ay maaring lumikha ng malaking kapakinabangan sa pagpapayaman at pangangalaga sa aming katutubong kaalaman.
Good morning, everyone. We shall begin our virtual program in a few moments. The National Research Council of the Philippines has always been proactive in disseminating scientific and cultural information to and for the masses. Despite the pandemic, the NRCP has taken strides to create solutions that promote availability of knowledge through their Brighter project. Today is just one of several fruits of the NRCP to pursue their goals of making scientific knowledge accessible to all. To receive a certificate of participation, please stay for the duration of the online class and fill out the survey at the end. To receive a certificate of completion, please register at the Brighter Commons website and complete the online classes. Before we get started, here are just a few reminders. Please make sure that your microphones are on mute or turned off throughout the duration of the program. Should you have any questions and concerns during the program, please let us know through the chat box. Our staff will be ready to assist you. This event will be recorded in its entirety. Please be advised that the recording of this event in full or in part may be used for NRCP's information and promotional materials as we deem necessary or appropriate.
Na kami pumakno nga nibiyagan nindat mo, idatanda kami bikan mangat na pinhod mo. Dawat mininggob hino aya tuboblemi, he ay makiwada-wada kida kami. He ay makiwada-wada kida kami. He ay makiwada-wada, he ay makiwada-wada kida kami.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wal barakatuh. Salam pa mga kiaulungan sing Tuhan.
pianaugan niya nabi iban Quran. Kasilasan niya sa plag pakatilingkal alam, maglasa kita niyo bat tumanang. Mbo Tuhan, tunggal nu sa sangdolan kami, buwanin kami rijiki maglabi-labi, lausangom rahmat nu subay panpinudji, hangkan kita bi subay magkasih-kasih.
Sa ngalan Pangurungan, pangutuyong Espiritong kalatag nun.
Pangurumon kang usalat, pangkalikupanan. Pangurumon kang pangirayan, at kang walay sikog balantang makagkululang. Pangurumon kang sinlakan, pangurumon kang apagatang, pangurumon kang masakpan, pangurumon kang suwadan, pangurumon kang panguloy, pangirayon, pangitapan, pangitoy, wat kang walay sikog balantang makagkululang.
Diyos na mapagpala, hiling namin ng pagpapalaganap ng kaalaman sa bawat nilalang.
Panginoon, dinggin mo kami.
O Diyos ng awa, bigyan mo kami ng kakayahan sa pagtataguyod ng pakikipag-ugnayan sa bawat isa.
Panginoon, dinggin mo kami.
O Diyos na mapagkalinga, mangyaring ikawan ang pagpapaunlad ng kalikasan ng tao sa mundo.
Panginoon, dinggin mo kami.
O Diyos na pag-ibig, tulutan mo ang aming bansa ng pagkakaisa at pagkakaunawaan sa gitna ng pagkakaiba-iba.
Panginoon, dinggin mo kami. Panginoon, dinggin mo kami. Panginoon, dinggin mo kami. Sa ngalan Pangurungan, pangutuyog Espiritong kalatag nun. Mawaling kami lijiki, maglabi-labi. Hey ay makiwala-wala, hey ay makiwala-wala kami. Hey ay makiwala-wala kila kami. Bayang magiliw.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Bayang magiliw, presang silanganan, alam ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, tuyad ka ng sa simoy ng sa langit bubukang, may nilagang tula at awit sa paglayo minamahal. Ang kisat ng matawag mo'y tagumpay na nagdidinig, ang bituin at araw niya kailang pamay magdidinig. Lupa ng araw na luwal, ating pagsinta ay langit sa piling mo. Ang ligaya na pagpay mag-aapit, ang mga tayang dahil sa'yo.
Through the Expert Class series, the NRCP will allow you to understand scientific activities or phenomena. Join us as we showcase the country's best and brightest, our experts, as they discuss with you current issues and how research can be used to develop responsive and efficient policies and solutions that have the greatest impact.
Good day, everyone. My name is Angel Bautista VII, and I am from the DOST Philippine Nuclear Research Institute, and I'm also a regular member of the NRCP Division 12 Earth and Space Sciences. Today, I would like to talk with you about our unlikely historians and how we can unravel the impacts of past nuclear activities to the Philippines using the skeletons of corals.
Sorry for that. I think there's a technical problem. So let's just wait for our technical assistants to fix this. So while waiting for this, I do hope that you guys are doing well during this pandemic. And I think the situation here in the Philippines is improving. So right now I'm in Bohol and together with some colleagues from the DNR conducting this coastal hazards assessment. This is really quite relevant to us. So let us now again go back to the video. I hope everything is okay now. So I give again the floor to Dr. Bautista.
Good day, everyone. My name is Angel Bautista VII, and I am from the DOST Philippine Nuclear Research Institute, and I'm also a regular member of the NRCP Division 12 Earth and Space Sciences. Today, I would like to talk with you about our unlikely historians and how we can unravel the impacts of past nuclear activities to the Philippines using the skeletons of corals.
I think, again, I apologize for that. May I know from our, is everything ready now? May I ask from our technical assistants? Okay, thank you.
Good day, everyone. My name is Angel Bautista VII, and I am from the DOST Philippine Nuclear Research Institute, and I'm also a regular member of the NRCP Division 12 Earth and Space Sciences. Today, I would like to talk with you about our unlikely historians and how we can unravel the impacts of past nuclear activities to the Philippines using the skeletons of corals. For today's discussion, let us be guided by the following questions. So first, how much was the impact of past nuclear activities to the Philippines? Second, how did the radioactive contamination from these activities reach the Philippines? For example, what are the mechanisms and pathways of transport for them to reach the Philippines? And third, and probably most important, is how can we use this information for policies or risk reduction mitigation in the event of future nuclear incidents and to better understand the Earth processes associated to it? So first, let me tell you about corals. We particularly look at the massive types of corals, such as from the genus Porites. So these corals grow as large as several meters in radius, and we can imagine that these grow larger and larger throughout the years. Now, if we take a cross-section of these corals, we can say that the top part of the coral would be the youngest, while the bottom part of the coral cross-section would be the oldest. As a result, this cross-section of coral acts like a history book, recording everything that happens in its surrounding, where it grew in, throughout its growth. Studying these corals can tell us a lot about the past, and we can use this information to prepare for the future. Collecting samples of these corals can be a bit challenging. Since corals are protected species, we first need to get free and prior informed consent from the local government units where the corals will be collected. This FPIC is a requirement to request for a gratuitous permit from the DA which is what is really needed to collect the coral samples. Currently, we are implementing a project in 3 sample sites, but for this presentation, let us focus on Baler Aurora. During the sampling, we first need to select a suitable coral. Ideally, we want a big coral so it can provide us a long historical record. We also want it to be smooth as it can be, or with minimum damage, since this indicates that the coral grew continuously throughout the years, and we will have a nice continuous record. Once we select a coral, we tie ropes around this coral while scuba diving, and this will allow the scuba divers to anchor him or herself onto the coral. Once the diver is anchored, we use a hydraulic drill to collect the coral cores. But don't worry, we only get a small part of the massive coral, and after sampling, we put a cement plug on the hole caused by the drilling to allow the coral to regrow on the damaged part. We try our best to minimize the damage to the coral as much as possible. Now, this is how the coral core sample looks like. The top image is the whole coral core, and the bottom image is what it would look like after we cut it into slabs using a circular saw. We do this because it is easier to work with slabs, as we can clearly see the growth bands of the coral. Do you know why are coral growth bands important? Let us know your answer. Growth bands, which are the light and dark bands we see in this image, can guide us on how old the coral is. One band or one pair of a light and a dark band corresponds to 1 year of growth. Why is this? It is because the density of the coral skeleton is affected by the temperature of the seawater where it is growing. And since here in the Philippines we roughly have 2 seasons every year, we can say that one coral growth band corresponds to a year. Next, what do we look for in the coral so we can reconstruct the impacts of past nuclear activities? To do this, we measure a radioisotope of iodine called iodine-129. We do this using an accelerator mass spectrometry, or AMS, only possible through our collaboration with the University of Tokyo, Japan, where I did my PhD studies. A bit of a side note, the most famous application of AMS is probably the radiocarbon or carbon-14 dating. Now, let's talk a little more about radioactive iodine. Probably the most well-known application of radioactive iodine is for thyroid treatment. But for medical purposes, we usually use iodine-123 or iodine-134, which are more radioactive, having a half-life of just a few hours to a few days. Particularly for iodine-131, it's 8 days. What we are using for our topic today is its distant cousin, iodine-129, which is much less radioactive. It is almost stable with a half-life of 16 million years. Now, iodine-129 is a fission product of uranium, and this means that it mainly comes from human nuclear activities. The primary sources of iodine-129 can be grouped into 3. Number 1, nuclear weapons or nuclear bomb testing. Number 2, nuclear fuel reprocessing. And number 3, nuclear accidents like the Chernobyl or the Fukushima accident. But today, we will focus on the nuclear weapons testing and the nuclear accidents. Let's talk more about the first source of iodine-129, nuclear weapons or nuclear bomb testing. A little bit of history. World War II ended with the United States dropping 2 nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. And was how the world was introduced to nuclear science and technology. Not such a good start, right? But because of this, the whole world knew that there was a thing such as nuclear bombs, and the countries that had the capability all wanted to have one. And so, starting in the 1950s, a lot of above-ground nuclear bomb testing was conducted around the world, most of it between the 1950s to the 1960s. This image shown here shows the testing timeline and the amount of weapons detonated, while the image shown above shows the nuclear bomb testing sites. In the Philippines, what we should be most concerned about is the largest testing site of the United States, called the Pacific Proving Grounds. It is located just a few thousand kilometers east or right side of the Philippines. Unfortunately, both the prevailing wind and ocean currents, those are the trade winds and the North Equatorial Current specifically, all blow westward, and so we are in the direct path of the nuclear fallout from the Pacific Proving Grounds tests. Just how strong were the tests conducted in the PPG, or the Pacific Proving Grounds? For comparison, the bombs detonated in Hiroshima and Nagasaki were only 15 and 21 kilotons. Now, the total amount of tests done in the PPG was 150 megatons, so that is 150,000 kilotons, or about 10,000 times more than what was detonated in Hiroshima. So the question is, how did those nuclear weapons tests affect the Philippines in the 1950s to the 1960s? Now, here is our data of iodine-129 from the corals. On the y-axis is the amount of iodine-129 in the corals, and on the x-axis is the year that it happened. Clearly, we can see the increase in iodine-129 in the years 1956 and 1960 because of the PPG bomb tests. First is about timing and the transport. Now, radioactivity arrives in Baler, or the Philippines, 1.8 years after detonation of the nuclear weapons at the Pacific Proving Grounds. About the transport pathway, it mainly passes through the ocean, particularly the North Equatorial Current, and that transport through the atmosphere is comparatively more negligible. And of course, it tells us about the magnitude or the impact of this nuclear weapons test to the Philippines. In particular, the iodine-129 amount seen in the corals correspond to about 17.9 becquerels per cubic meter of cesium-137. Now, cesium-137 is the more famous radionuclide in terms of its radioactive impact. Compared to the safety limits, 17.9 becquerels per cubic meter of cesium-137 is about 10 times the background. So definitely the level of radioactivity increased in the Philippines. But if we compare it with the safety limits, the seawater safety limits is about 90,000 becquerels per cubic meter of cesium-137, and the drinking water safety limits is about 10,000 becquerels per cubic meter. So it's very far. 17.9 becquerel per cubic meter is very far from this safety limits. And so we can say that even though the bomb tests are so strong, the radioactive contamination in the sea is well within the safety limits, and it's safe for human health. Now, moving on from nuclear weapons testing, let's go to the other major source of iodine-129, and that's the nuclear accidents, particularly the Fukushima accident of Japan. So again, a little bit of background. The Fukushima accident happened in March 11, 2011. A magnitude 9 earthquake caused a tsunami that led to the nuclear power plant meltdown in Fukushima, Japan. This accident caused the evacuation of 400,000 people, and about 80% of the radionuclides released from that accident ended up being deposited over the Pacific Ocean. Just how strong was the radioactivity released in that accident? So for comparison, the cesium-137 release at the ocean release point in March 30, 2011 was about 47,000 becquerels per liter. And in April 6, 2011, it was 68,000 becquerels per liter, while the Japanese regulatory limit was only 90 becquerels per liter. So it's way above the regulatory limit. Given that 80% of the radioactivity released in the Fukushima accident was deposited over the Pacific Ocean, we expect that the ocean currents of the Pacific will transport the radioactive contamination. There are two possible pathways or routes that the radioactivity from the Fukushima can reach the Philippines. The first is the longer route through the North Pacific Gyre, going west first to the United States, then south to the equator, then finally west to the Philippines. The second route, which is the shorter and more pressing route, is through the Kuroshio recirculation gyre, shown by the red arrows in this image. Now let's look again at our results. We see a clear iodine-129 peak in the year 2014.7, and we think that this could be the Fukushima accident contamination traveling through the Kuroshio recirculation gyre, the shorter pathway. Now, if this is really the Fukushima accident signal, so these are the information that we can learn from this data. First, the timing. The radioactivity from the accident reached the Philippines 3.5 years after the Fukushima accident. Next is the magnitude or the impact of radioactivity from the Fukushima accident. Now, that iodine-129 peak we saw corresponds to about 8 becquerels per cubic meter of cesium-137. Now, if we compare that magnitude to the safety limits, again, the seawater safety limits is 90,000 becquerels per cubic meter, and the drinking water safety limits is 10,000 becquerels per cubic meter. So 8 becquerels from the Fukushima accident is way below these safety limits. What about seafood? For example, we assume that the radioactivity is concentrated in seafood like fish or shrimps by 100 times. Now, 8 becquerels of cubic meter in the seawater will correspond to about 1.75 becquerels per kilogram of the seafood. Now, the seafood safety limit, on the other hand, is 1,000 becquerels per kilogram of food. So, 1.75 versus 1,000 becquerels per kilogram is very far. And so we could say that the radioactivity, if that indeed is from the Fukushima accident, is way below the safety limits, and it's completely safe for human health. Now, how can we use this information and translate it to relevant policies with regards to our present and possible future scenarios? What do you think? Well, we have several recommendations. First, even with the strength of nuclear weapons testing done in the 1950s to the 1960s and the Fukushima accident in 2011, we found that the degree of radioactivity in the Philippine coasts are completely safe, probably because of the tests in the accident sites were far enough to dilute the radioactivity. As far as radioactivity is concerned, we can say that there is no cause for health alarm connected to these incidents, and it's completely okay to go for a swim or eat seafood caught from our seas. We can also use what we learned from the past through the coral data and prepare for future nuclear incidents. In particular, as we have discussed, the first one is the timing. Any nuclear event from the Pacific Proving Grounds will take about 1.8 years to reach the Philippines. And any nuclear event that happens in Japan, for particularly close to the Fukushima site, will take at least 3 years to reach the Philippines. Second, the magnitude or the impact. If we're talking about nuclear weapons tests from the Pacific Proving Grounds, it would take more than 10,000 megatons of nuclear weapons to cause any dangerous radioactivity levels in the shores of the Philippines. Of course, the effect will be stronger if the accident or the nuclear weapons test happen closer to the country. And third and last, about the transport or the transport pathway. Radioactivity through the ocean is more of a concern than through the atmosphere. But still, we should still monitor both. Now, the lessons learned from this study can also be applied to other incidents of contamination, not just nuclear in nature. For example, if there are chemical spills or oil spills, the same estimates of timing or magnitude can be applied in those incidents or can be used in those incidents. And lastly, corals can tell us a lot about what happened to our environment in the past. and it's just another big reason to love them and take care of them. We've reached the end of our discussion. I hope you learned something about our topic today, and I hope I've also given you another reason to love and value our corals more. Again, I am Angel Bautista II from NRCP Division 12. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Bautista. Truly, your research is such a novel research, and it's really good that you emphasize on the fact that we really need to take care of our corals. So anyway, let's now proceed to the next part of this class. So as today's expert, we have with us Dr. Hildy Maria E. Nacorda. So Dr. Hildy Maria E. Nacorda is an associate professor from the School of Environmental Science and Management, or SESM, from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. I do hope I was able to pronounce your name correctly, Ma'am Nacorda. So without much ado, Ma'am, please give your reaction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sir Carlo. We meet again virtually. Congratulations to us after listening to Dr. Angel Bautista II's speech or talk today about his novel research on corals, being a historian, a likely historian. But then again, this is not the first time that we are hearing corals saying things about the past. They were foremost highlighted as our sources also of our history of temperature records. And thank you for another talk on how corals could be preserved and a justification for why even the older ones have to be taken care of. This session this session actually reminded me of IDIN 29. And as you have progressed through your talk, I learned more things and remembered more about the dives that we have undertaken in some parts of the eastern Philippine seaboard. In slide 18, you were able to mention I-29 peaks, and the question that popped in my mind was, these are peaks, and I'd like to ask whether there is a proxy other than I-29, being it as a definitive measure of what you have just told us for our past events. Would this proxy, if at all, be giving you the same result, and would it be giving you the same takeaway as you did today? I asked the question in slide 18, how long or is the impact immediately felt or recorded by the coral? And then in your successive slides, you were able to show that it took at least 1.8 years to reach that coral, particularly in Baler, Aurora. Your choice actually of Aurora as a first storyboard is strategic. Thank you for that. Your notes on the FPIC and the obtaining of the gratuitous permit following rules is commendable. And then in the next successive slides, you have mentioned about the impact, and I noticed that I missed your explanation on why I-29 has been increasing after that impact in the 1950s. And then it is a relief to note that of the safety that you have mentioned for human health. And we talk about now and in the future, hopefully with no other radioactive testing. I am just curious, what will your storyboard be like if you are going to disseminate this to the general public, other than this platform that we are having now. What will be your key takeaways for the LGUs that provided you the permits? They are the most excited to hear about this, and they would be proud to banner their coastal zone for protection so that there are more stories to tell. What will be your next questions if you will be interested in pursuing this line of work? You also noted in your last slide, one of the last slides, that there will be a difference in the effect if it is, there will be an effect that will be felt if the incident that we have reported happened nearer. I wonder what these effects will be. I mean, if you project through it, I wonder what these are. So, congratulations once again. At this point, I'd like to say congratulations to NRCP and to Sir Angel. Sir Angel. I am curious and I will await your story for the Palawi Island in Santa Ana, Cagayan, and in Calaguas Island in Camarines Norte. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Nacorda. Now, before we go to the Q&A, may I request Dr. Bautista to provide some comments on the reaction of Dr. Nacorda. Do you have any comment on the things that she took note of?
Okay po. Medyo madami yung questions, but I'll try to answer. Okay, I'll try to answer one by one. Yung mga naalala ko. The first one is the other proxies. So I know that other researchers from around the world are also using isotopes of uranium and plutonium to show these impacts as well. But the behaviors of the different elements are slightly different. So comparing everything, I think iodine-129 is still one of the best proxies among all those, but it would still be useful to look at the other isotopes in conjunction. It's just so happened we don't have that capability yet, but we are very interested on doing those things as well in the future, like looking at multi-proxies, not just iodine but the other isotopes. That is one. Second, and the question. The other question, could you remind me?
It's about the continuous increase in I-129 after the impact.
Okay. As I have mentioned during the presentation, the iodine-129 doesn't only come from nuclear weapons tests and nuclear accidents. There's a third source, that is nuclear fuel reprocessing. And actually, that is the biggest source of iodine-129 in the environment. Nuclear fuel reprocessing, currently, it's being used to recycle nuclear fuel. So, for example, you have fresh nuclear fuel, you use it in a nuclear power plant. Once it's used, you can put it in a reprocessing plant. And so once it comes out of the reprocessing plant, you can use it again in the nuclear power plant. However, that is its current use, but historically, that same process was used to create weapons-grade nuclear material. So when you create nuclear weapons to concentrate uranium, plutonium, the same exact process was being done. So historically, it has a military and it has a commercial purpose now. And a lot of the countries are doing it. And even currently, they are doing it. So that is actually the biggest source of iodine-129 that's causing the continuous increase up to the present.
The final one maybe is about the storyboard.
And the story for the LGUs.
Yeah, the general public.
The general public. So mainly, our main policy recommendations for this ay yun nga po yung mga natutunan natin in terms of, for example, the timing, what to expect in case something happens in the future, or the magnitude, the timing. But for the current story, what we want to say, it's even though ang lakas-lakas ng mga nuclear weapons testing or nagkaroon ng Fukushima accident, it's completely safe. That's the first one. But then again, in the future, we could use that information to prepare so at least we know what to expect because of this information that we found out from our corals. So we could better prepare if something happens in the future. Pero wag naman sana.
Okay. Thank you for your feedback. The next time I dive and I see massive, large varieties, I will think about you and I'll think about I-129. Thank you, Sir Carlo.
Thank you. Thank you po.
So thank you very much for that, Dr. Bautista. Kasi in one of your segment, you were actually drilling the coral. Medyo kinalabutan lang ako ng konti, but you mentioned that these they will be able to recover. So in relation to this, there's a question: would it be possible that we use dead corals for this study?
Yes, it is also possible. Actually, what we're using right now are modern live corals. But there's also a branch of this study that uses fossil corals. So even yung the uplifted types, yung mga nasa surface na, they can be, you can take a core on them and then you could study everything that happened when it was growing. The only catch is that for dead corals, it stopped growing. So for the modern corals, the top part is the present. But for the dead corals, the top part, you're not sure when it stopped growing. But at least you have a record. For example, if it was 1,000 years ago, you just need to do some further dating methods like uranium, thorium, or carbon-14 to determine what is the age of that dead coral. So you could use the information and then assign when it happened. So yeah, you can use that coral.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. You know what? We are in Bohol right now doing coastal hazard assessment for tsunami and storm surge. And we're looking at uplifted coral reefs as well as an indicator of past earthquakes. So this is quite novel because you're now looking at the possible, effect of this, the nuclear bombs. Now, in relation to, there's a political question here. I don't know if you would answer it, right? What were the primary objectives for the Bataan nuclear power plant? Obviously, you're still young then, right? You graduated in 2013, something like that, right? So do you have any idea? And what was the reason for building, or what was the reason for its closure? Let me just ask this. It's a political question.
Political and historical.
Historical, yes.
So just as far as I know, so I'm not the expert no sa history, but as far as I know, so the Bataan nuclear power plant was built during the Marcos times. But unfortunately lang, parang it wasn't meant to be. When it was about to open, some accident, I think the 3 Mile Island or the Chernobyl accident happened. And so the opening was delayed and they were putting in more measures as a lessons learned from those accidents. And then na-delay yung opening because something was happening internationally. And then inapot na lang nung political upheaval nung EDSA, yung we all know the history na nagkaroon ng change of administration. And then, hindi pa pala Chernobyl nung time ni Marcos, parang 3 Mile Island. But nung after mag-change ng administration, I think it was a 50-50 if they were going to push through the Bataan nuclear power plant. There was a stalemate dun sa, I think, Congress yata. But then that stalemate was broken when the Chernobyl accident happened. So when the Chernobyl accident happened, parang na-break yung stalemate, and then they eventually decided to mothball the Bataan nuclear power plant. So until now, it's on preservation mode. Unfortunately, yung mga kasabay niya na mga exact same design from Korea, for example, in another country, na supposedly they were built together at the same time. Until now, those countries are benefiting from those nuclear power plants. It's still working. If only kung natuloy lang natin yung Bataan nuclear power plant. It was already kompleto. Nandun na yung nuclear fuel. We just had to flip on the switch and it will work. But then what happened, and then it was history. Until now, it's still in preservation mode.
Yeah, that's very, very true. But of course, there are still some questions here. Let me just go back first to the science here. Of course, we've seen how you've tapped corals, right? So is it also possible? A question from Mr. Nico Jose Leander. Is it also possible to use other long-lived sessile marine organisms like Tridacna to study the effects of nuclear activities in the Pacific region?
Yes, it's also possible. So a lot of people are using other species. Even I think Tridacna are giant clams. Is that correct?
Yes.
So there are some researchers internationally using giant clams. The only catch is that yung growth bands, the growth bands of the giant clams are much smaller. So the techniques that you have to do are more micro in scale, as opposed to the coral. So coral, you could the bands are bigger. Your subsampling would be a bit easier. You can do it by hand. But when you're using other species that have much micro scale growth, you have to use more sophisticated techniques that to do those kinds of research. But it is possible, and people are doing it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Actually, going back to the dead corals, it's quite interesting because I'm here in Bohol. I wanted to drill some of the walls of the churches because here in Bohol it's familiar for these our church, diba? The old churches. And then I noticed that they were actually one of the churches here in the Philippines. They were featuring the coral reefs, the first church to utilize coral reefs, and we know that is. I think, would it be right to feature that? Or, kasi nga, kita ko, di ba? It kind of, baka ma-motivate yung mga tao not to use the coral reefs.
Coral reef. Naputol yata si Sir Carlo. Disconnect.
Hello?
Yeah, but to answer yung current question ni Sir Carlo.
Yeah, sorry, naputol ako. Yeah, kaya nga, yun nga, yung sa churches.
Yeah.
Pero nga, in relation to let me go back to that political question. A lot of people are interested. Personally, baka yun nga lang, delikado kasi you're from the PNRI.
Yes.
Siguro gawin na lang natin, how can we be prepared from future nuclear incident? Japan is a first world country, and they had this problem with that Fukushima incident. In the case of the Philippines, we almost have the same tectonic setting as the Philippines. So how do you think the Philippines can be more prepared from future nuclear incident?
Okay, so the nuclear power industry is one of the most regulated in terms of energy. Talaga napakahigpit na regulations and daming standards. And then we have to, if we want to go nuclear power, it would really take years of preparation. So you have to put all those systems in place. You have to meet all those standards. So ang mahalaga lang siguro is we instead we do it as best as we could. You could prepare as best as you could, but you cannot really prepare 100% with 100% certainty. But yeah, with all that has happened in the world, the standards are always being updated with the lessons learned. So mahalaga po if we go nuclear power, we just really follow those international standards, regulations, and we do it as best as we can with informed choices, science-based information. So
okay.
Yeah, so that's the best we can do, I think.
Yeah, in relation to that, I was just wondering, how do we dispose then of nuclear waste? Where are we going to dispose them? I think that's one of the biggest issues against the nuclear power plants, right? Where are we going to dispose this, especially that they have long residence time?
Yes. So there's a lot of proposals. So medyo outside of my field na yung waste disposal. But as far as I've heard, one of the best ways is to the borehole method. So drill a borehole deep into the ground, somewhere geologically stable, and then you could deposit in there. But in my opinion, other ways is that one is reprocessing. So I've mentioned reprocessing before. If you just dispose fresh fuel after using it, the time that you have to dispose of them would be in the thousands of years. So parang thousands of years dapat stable in disposal mo. But if you're able to reprocess that nuclear fuel, get other nuclides from it, and then use it again, then slowly, the amount of time that it needs to be disposed of is become shortened. So there are many different technologies like nuclear fuel reprocessing, and then the other one, pero ito medyo far into the future pa, is fast breeder reactors. Yung current ngayon is mga fission reactors. Pero yung fast breeder reactors, para na rin yan, nauubos niya talaga lahat nung even yung mga tinatawag na fertile material. So, basta, yung nauubos niya yung mga radioactive amount dun sa fuel such that the time that you have to dispose of them, the time that the disposal should be stable is greatly shortened. So that would be solved yung ganitong dilemma.
Okay, there's the sorry. So we have another one. I think the person who just would like to be clarified of some aspects of your talk. Is there an established motion of spread distribution with respect to the nuclear radiation contamination, and what are the specific type of corals that are preferred as good identification in studying radioactive contamination?
Okay. For the first part of the question, as far as you know, radioactivity, if it's released into the environment, it moves with the environment, like the wind direction, and then for the oceans, the coastal currents, yung mga ocean currents, yun nga, as we have seen in our ocean, in our data. So it does move mainly with the wind and the oceans. And ano yung second part ng question, Sir Carlo? Ulit?
What are this what specific type of corals is preferred for this kind of study?
So the most preferred, as I've shown, we are looking for porrites corals. Ito yung locally known as bahura. So when we sample and when we ask the local fishermen to help us locate these corals, we ask them, saan po ba yung mga bahura dito? So we think that's one of the best species of corals to use in these kinds of studies.
I was just wondering, when you drill, how long would you expect them to recover?
It won't recover the whole, hindi na ma-recover yung whole, but when you plug it, the coral will grow again over the hole, and then it will continue as is. Pero of course, yung nakuha mo na part, small part lang naman ng massive, would remain hollow na for the longest time.
Okay. Sige, may hold pala. Dr. Nacorda, do you have anything to say or to react on or comment on?
I think I've said enough.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm amused at listening to you, both of you.
Okay, again, there's another question. If we utilize, or let's say we utilize a nuclear power plant, let's say we activate the Bataan nuclear plant. So this is a question from Nikolai Gilliar. How would it affect the Philippines' energy needs? Do you have any idea? Mumura kaya daw yung kuryente?
Okay. Comparing the cost of different types of energies, yung talagang for the lifetime of the plant, nuclear power plant is one of the cheapest talaga compared to the other types of energies. In relation pa, it's a base load type of power, meaning 24/7 it gives power. Unlike, for example, wind. Pag walang wind, tumitigil siya magbigay ng power, or pag solar, pag walang sun, tumitigil siya magbigay ng power. Nuclear power, once you open or when you start it, it will give you power almost 24/7. So yun yung mga advantages niya. It's a base load. It's one of the cheapest modes of power, and of course, in terms of the environment, it has the almost zero carbon emissions. So if you compare it with coal and oil, releasing almost of this carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases, nuclear energy has one of the least amount of emissions in terms of greenhouse gases. So if we're talking about environment and climate change, then also nuclear power is one of the best choices for that. So in terms of yung cost, definitely we think it would lower our electrical costs, not just for the private citizens, but if you imagine mga businesses, mga factories, if the costs of the electricity is lower in the Philippines, then it would encourage businesses to go into the Philippines to set up shop here in our country if we have cheaper electricity rates.
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. You know what? I think the Philippines has one of the most expensive, di ba, yung electrical, because we import everything. Like I think coal is our main source. This is being imported from Indonesia and China, and then we also have, of course, the petroleum, right? So these are our main sources. So it's actually worth looking also on tapping nuclear resources. But do you think that we have sufficient resources for this, or do we need to import as well? How do you actually run this?
It starts with a national position. So the national government first has to say, yes, we're going nuclear power. And then the ball starts rolling. We prepare, we train people, we set up the systems. In fact, PNRI has to be split into two agencies because currently we are both a promotion and a regulatory agency for nuclear. And if you think about it, that's a conflict of interest in itself. How can you regulate without bias something that you're trying to promote? So if we go nuclear power, the PNRI has to be split into a completely purely regulatory agency, and then the promotion is another agency. So for example, that's just an example, but there are a lot of things that has to be done if we go towards nuclear power. So yeah, so it's a big preparation if we go towards that. But it starts with a national position, probably from the president. Dapat.
Okay. Anyway, there's a geological question. I don't know if you would answer this, but I can answer because I'm a geologist. And the question is about: is it true that the Bataan nuclear power plant was never opened because it is located along a fault? Though will you be able to answer this in relation to the fault part?
Magtulong na lang tayo.
Okay. Maybe I'll just well, the Bataan nuclear plant, right? It was a very big issue, and this was discussed in one of the National Geological Conventions. I think that was in 1998. So that was the main highlight of that convention. So they were looking whether it sits on top of the Subic Bay Fault or it does not sit on top of a Subic Bay Fault. So I think there's an agreement that it does not sit on the Subic Bay Fault, but it is near the Subic Bay Fault. So if it's near the Subic Bay Fault, the second question is the Subic Bay Fault active? So to date, there's still some questions in relation to the activity of the fault. So my former students from Ateneo de Manila together with me, conducted a geophysical survey to see whether this is active or not. But the answer that we can only give is that it is potentially active. In geology, it's okay to build a structure near a fault but not on top of the fault, provided that the structure is able to withstand strong earthquakes. So it should have an appropriate engineering design, just like Japan. I mean, Japan is an active it receives a lot of earthquakes, right? But they are able to do this. Unfortunately, they did not foresee that tsunami big event happening. But I'm not advocating for the opening. There's still a lot of questions about this because, of course, a very big question is, are we really prepared? So in relation to that, Sir Bautista, I don't know if you want to answer this. Would you recommend for the reopening of the Bataan nuclear plant?
Mahirap.
Ang hirap yan kasi you're from the PNRI.
Yes. Yeah, but one thing, personally na lang, I'm really for nuclear power. That's a personal opinion. So I think it's one of the best choices in terms of energy. But whether to reopen BNPP or to build a new one, I think that's a question of ano ba yung pinaka-cost efficient. If you build the BNPP, that would take quicker, that would be faster. But how long can we really maintain its operation before we have to shut it down? On the other hand, if we build a new power plant, that would take longer, that would be more costly. But how long, for example, kung 30 or 50 years naman natin siya mapapakinabangan, which option is more cost efficient? So maybe, kung nagmamadali ba tayo or hindi, parang mga ganun. There's a lot of considerations, and it's something that really we have to sit down on and decide with all the facts, lay down all the facts and decide based on them. So that's right.
For me, Dr. Bautista, personally, ako namamadali. Ang mahal kasi ng presyo dito ng electric bill, di ba? Ako namamadali ako. But I think it's really important that we find an alternative source, right? That is actually sustainable. I think it's the big question really to sa pag-operate ng ating nuclear plant. Are we ready? That's the biggest question eh. But what do you think, Ma'am Dr. Nacordo? What do you think?
Actually, a perspective ko lang na mapoprovide. Wait lang, sorry. The perspective that I'd like to share is something that is more general. For us, we ought to realize that as importers of energy, that type of energy will soon be gone. So yung mga non-renewable sources, humihingi din lang tayo. And before countries prioritize us, syempre sila muna over the years. So sana maging strategic din tayo like other countries on how we plan. I mean, China has a plan for the West Philippine Sea for the last 50 years. Kaya minsan hindi natin sila ma-question bakit ganyan na action nila ngayon. Tayo, sana ganun din. Governments will take action on pursuing long-term plans and considering renewable sources. Hindi yung pati yung umaasa tayo ng matagalan. I know it's a question of priorities. Yung sinasabi mo nagmamadali ka, ako rin eh. Gusto ko na nga mag-solar sa buong bahay ko. Kaya lang, the question of solar panels being e-waste after its use is wala pa tayong handa na parang mechanism paano siya tatapon. So, ganun din, paikot-ikot pa tayo. So, but then we have brighter heads now, like you. Ako, I'll retire. I can count my years before I retire, my fingers before, and you'll be able to think about that.
Tama po, Ma'am, yan. Talaga yung China, they have a long-term plan. Kasama siguro pagsakop sa Pilipinas. I do hope it's not part of their plan. Diba? At din talaga yung ibang portions ng West Philippine Sea or the so-called South China Sea. Now, let me just go back to the issue about corals. I don't know how expert you are in corals, Dr. Bautista, but there's this question na sabi ni Ma'am Lim, in their locality, they have incorporated reef balls in the marine protected area. What is your take about this? Can this be adapted in various locations, considering that corals help lessen impact of climate change? I think this question can be directed to both Dr. Bautista and Dr. Nagorda. Let me start with Dr. Bautista.
Actually po medyo out of my expertise na yung coral reef restoration and management. So maybe Ma'am Hildy could answer this better.
Ma'am Hildy.
Ito ba yung nasa Boracay?
I'm not so sure po. I'm not so sure po.
Kasi the reef balls that I came across with are made of concrete, and they were meant to act as artificial substrates for corals to recruit. So the idea was to put in corals where they aren't found at all. So, yung concept sana ng conservation, ng restoration, follows a certain procedures and certain ecological procedures din. I think that one of the issues before naman was instead of recruiting coral planulae, for it to settle, ang nangyayari, it recruits algae. Of course, ang recruitment process starts with yung succession starts with the film of bacteria, and then algae, and then organisms that you like, and it takes years. And sometimes, kapag highly nutritious, we're filled with nutrients ang ating tubig, mas gusto ng algae yon, and they become competitors of the family to recruit. In that case, kapag ang nare-recruit mo ay algae at hindi yung corals, which is the purpose of the reef balls, then your objective fails. The reef balls fail. I think as artificial substrates, maraming technologies ngayon na pwedeng gamitin, pero we have to test and we have to follow yung provisions din ng RA 8550. Hindi tayo pwede gumalaw, magtanim o maglagay. We have to ask for good science behind what we do to conserve or restore. Marami tayong small initiatives, small efforts. Pag may konting positive results, itutuloy. Pero yung precautionary measure, yung long-term impact na kung ano nangyayari, katulad ng it becomes a hazard, katulad ng it becomes, in the end, will recruit anong tawag mo doon? May tawag sa term na hindi mo gusto. At isa, how do you say that in English? I forget. Yun yung magre-recruit.
Okay. Okay po. One thing that I noticed while doing coastal hazards assessment, kasi coral reef is also one of the parameters that the state of the coral reefs, no? People tend to focus a lot on the coastal zone, but they should also look into what's happening inland. Kasi yung mga activities din natin inland, right? Like if you have a lot of pollutants going into the system, the coastal system, I believe that would also affect the coral reef. Isa nga lang kasi sa mga natin, di ba? I think yung tourism development, I think that should be revisited. No, kasi that although it does promote some give additional source of livelihood, but I think there should be an ecological approach in relation to this. We can always find ways to rehabilitate or restore our coral reefs, pero kung ating mga gawain ay hindi din nagbabago, I think that would also be a problem. Well, that's my take. I don't know if that's your take as well, no? Pero I'll be here in Bohol until December 15. Are there any more concerns from our participants here? Yun nga, unfortunately, for all our participants, I hope you understand that we won't be able to answer all the questions because one, I think it's beyond the expertise of our resource speakers, including me. And another thing is that, of course, we do not want to put our main speaker in a uncomfortable situation. Yeah. Okay, so I think that's basically it. For our secretariat, are there any more questions that you can see from the chat box?
No more, sir. Okay na po. This is Lynn.
So with that, thank you very much to our speaker again, Dr. Angel T. Bautista, for graciously answering the questions and responding to all comments. Of course, I would also like to thank Dr. Hilde Maria Nacorda for her reaction and for participating in this well-attended event. So to officially close this morning's expert class program, we have with us, so we have with us the official of the NRCP who ensures the success of every NRCP event. It is my pleasure to call on Executive Director Dr. Marietta Bañez Sumagaysay.
Thank you po. Thank you, Doc Carlo. And good morning, classmates. It was an interesting and exciting couple of hours spent with Teacher Angel. And I am sure we learned new things this morning, some additions to our stock knowledge about corals and nuclear activities. For me, I am an economist and social scientist. I never thought that there is another use and importance of corals other than being the habitat of fishes, and that coral reefs support life underwater. That fishers and fish workers will have more fish catch with more corals around, serving as nesting grounds. And also that coral reefs, the fishing households and the fishing villages will be protected from the damaging effects of wave action and tropical storms. So this morning, there is something new for me, and I thank you for this new knowledge. And I know all of us in the non-science world, this is something new also for you. I am pretty sure that most of us in this virtual room who are not into geology, nor to the physical and marine sciences feel the same way. Corals are important to marine life, to human life, and to the economic life of the nation. Now we can add something more. Corals can also tell history. And this is the beauty of bringing science close to non-scientists. And for our scientists, unraveling the science into popular lingo such that behavioral nudges are achieved. And this is the design of our expert class. The expert class of NRCP is a platform, as I said, designed to translate a technical concept into something that will easily be picked up by legislators and decision makers, and also to non-scientists. Science will explain, and scientists like Teacher Angel and Ma'am Hildy and of course Doc Carlo can bring to fore the issues of national concern that can be addressed through science. So worried about effects of Fukushima accident or of the nuclear weapons testing? Worry no more. Our corals will ease our unfounded fears and unnecessary stress and anxiety about our waters. So Teacher Angel says that there is no cause for alarm. We also sincerely thank Dr. Hildy Maria Nacorda, an expert in the field, for her additional insights on the topic and for graciously helping answer some queries from the audience, from our classmates. Our gratitude, of course, goes to Dr. Carlo Quiano, the chair of the NRCP Earth and Space Division, for organizing and hosting this expert class online and also for responding to some questions. So dear classmates, 2021 is fast ending, and so too is our expert class online series. We have 13, and there are 2 more lessons before the year ends. And we are pleased to know that many of you are visiting the Brighter Commons, where you will find this and other past expert class sessions. You will also find the Back to Basic online class videos since we started early this year. Some of you have answered the quizzes. Thank you. And you must have been able to receive your certificates of attendance and certificates of completion. We also want to thank our media friends. I saw Radio Aguila earlier and some others for always being in our online classes. Please continue to help NRCP disseminate the challenge for all of us to protect the corals and let them grow and regrow, and for corresponding policies to be crafted that are applicable down to the barangay level. We don't forget that we are an archipelago and a number of our villages are coastal. To our decision makers and program developers who joined us today, thank you. Please let us know for interests in the subject on hand, and I'm confident that our NRCP experts from Division 12 will be excited to let the discourse going and for Solons to pick this up for evidence-based policy making and science-based decision making and program development. The LGUs, according to Dr. Nacorda, will be excited to banner their coastlines and coastal resources. And if I may add, maybe not much about what is iodine 129. We leave that to the technical experts to explain to us. So to all of us, ito yung nare-remember ko sa mga lola ko, sabi nila, huwag aapakan ang mga corals, huwag sisirain intentionally, at huwag dadalhin sa bahay at sa opisina para gawing decoration. So, ang hirap din magpatubo ng corals, di ba? It takes years. So hanggang dito na lamang for today's expert class episode, and congratulations sa lahat. Godspeed to all. Back to you, Doc Carlo.
Maraming pong salamat at Dr. Magaysay. So before we conclude today's program, may I request everyone to open their cameras for a quick photo opportunity to comment.
Okay, so yun mga kaibigan, napakinggan natin yung DOST report, no? Ayan yung ating mga eksperto, talaga namang napakagagaling, ano? So ayan mga kaibigan, at ako bago tayo magpaalam, no? Nandito kasama natin ngayon sa ating year-end special, si Gasi Sarip. Ito po yung ating katropa na reporter, no? Pero bago yan, muli maraming salamat po sa panonood nila Ma'am Evelyn Limatsu na nasa Japan. Ma'am, nandito po si Nakagawad Dadal Pineda at ang kapatid nyo, si Madam Estela Pineda. At kay Kuya Rolando Tequilio Mendez, magandang gabi, salamat po. At gayon din kay Kagawad Sani Dadal Pineda, kay Kuyang Ricky Del Rosario, at kay Bobby Aquino, no, ng Palasan, at kay Pep Messina, maraming salamat din, at kay Romel Martinez, at kay Erasmo Rocky de los Santos nanonood, at syempre kay Consial Edward Nolasco. Konsi, bakit naman umalis ka kaagad? May sinalang lang tayo kanina, kaya hindi kita agad nababa. After naman that, pagbaba ko, wala ka na. No, dahil sana ikaw naman ang aking kakapanayamin, no, dito sana sa studio kanina ng live. Kagawad Consial Edward Nolasco. Anyway, thank you, Consi. Sana sa susunod balik ka kahit walang year-end party o year-end special ng Millennial, kasi nandito lahat yung anchor, yung reporter namin na nandito ngayon sa studio dahil magkakaroon kami ng parang meeting. Kasama na ngayon yung pag-guest sa inyo para kahit paano bago matapos ang taon kung ano ang nangyari. Sana interviewin kita kung ano nangyari nitong pandemic, ano ginawa mo bilang isang councilor sa iyong distrito, no? At ngayon darating ang Pasko at bagong taon, ano pa ang mga proyektong inilaan mo sa iyong distrito. At maraming salamat din kay Bambo Garcia, kay Ma'am Marilyn Rondina. Nanonood pala sa atin si Boss Rapi Rico, yung ating katropa rin na ito'y mahusay din na kasamahan din natin sa media. Yan, maraming salamat sa iyo Boss Rapi Rico. Yan. At gayon din, kanina pa ba? Baka may nakalimutan pa tayo wala na. Yun At ayun, nandito sila. Ngayon kasama natin yung ating reporter na si Gasi Sarip. Medyo magtatanong lang tayo sa kanya, no? Gasi, magandang gabi. Bumati ka muna sa ating mga katropa.
Unang-una sa lahat, magandang gabi ho sa ating hong mga katropa na sumusubaybay ngayon sa ating hong palatuntunan.
Okay. So yan po, kasi yung ating katropang si Gasi, ito po ay nag-aaral pa, no, sa University of the East sa Maynila. Gasi, kamusta naman ang pag-aaral natin? At syempre, kasabay niyan, yung ginagawa mong mga paggawa ng script, ng reporting dito sa Millennial Online TV. Hindi ba nahahati oras mo? Hindi ka ba nagkakaroon ng stress dahil nag-aaral ka, gumagawa ka ng script, nagre-report?
Sa katunayan ho, Sir Rosel, suliranin ho ngayon ng mga estudyante ngayon, lalong-lalo na December. Finals exam ho kasi ng mga karamihang eskwelahan ngayon. Ngunit, sa palagay ko, yung pagre-report o kaya paggawa ng mga script, kasama na yung mga bagay na yan, kabilang na ito sa mga passion natin So, kumbaga, kahit gaano tayo ka-busy, although meron tayong mga priorities sa buhay natin, yung mga kailangan gusto nating marating, although kahit gaano tayo ka-busy, yung passion natin, kailangan meron tayong, nakakahanap tayo ng oras para doon.
So, bilang estudyante, nagkaroon ng pandemic, hindi nagkaroon ng face-to-face, puro webinar lang, kumusta? Hindi ba naka-apekto sa pag-aaral mo? Okay rin ba kahit na ganun walang face-to-face?
Sa totoo lamang, noong una, mas gusto ko yung online class. Pero katagalan kasi ang epekto nitong online class, hindi kasi sanay yung katawan natin na hindi tayo pumapasok sa eskwelahan. Kabilang kasi, sir, yung excited ka pumasok ng umaga, gigising ka ng umaga. Ngayon,
correct.
Parang kasi, sabi nga ng ibang mga kaklase, binabati ko kayo, sabi nga ho nila, malaking epekto sa mental health naming mga estudyante, yung online class. Kasi nga naman paano ka nga naman mag-aaral kung katabi mo lamang yung kama? Di ba? So, napakahirap mag-time management. Lalo na kung katulad ko na hindi lamang pag-aaral ang iniisip, marami ring mga organizations.
Correct, oo. So, about naman dyan sa ginagawa mo, katulad dyan sa pagre-report, sa paggawa mo ng script, syempre kahit paano, may naitulong ba ako, nakatulong ba ako doon sa mga tinuro ko sa iyo na mga sistema sa paggawa ng script at pagbo-voice over?
Nako, sa paksang yan, kung hindi nyo alam, sa larangan ng pagre-report o kaya nagsimula ako rito, si Sir Rosel talaga ang akin hong mentor, ang batikang reporter ng Millennial Online TV.
Oo. Actually kasi alam mo, Gasi, yung mga dinaanan mo, mga kababayan, dinaanan ko rin ho yun nung una. Kaya, syempre, kung ano yung aking natutunan, syempre, sinishare ko. At, una, hindi ko naman sinasabing full, kumbaga sa rango full-fledged. Hindi. Marami pa rin hong kulang. Aminado ko ron. At hindi naman ako tulad ng iba na nagmamagaling. Ang magaling ako, hindi. So, marami pa rin kulang. Siyempre, ang akin lang, kung ano yung alam ko at ano yung nalalaman ko, yun lang po sinishare ko. At siyempre, ayoko rin naman na siyempre nag-aaral pa si Gasi na siyempre tama dapat yung kanyang matutunan at kung paano paghahanay ng balita at kung paano niya i-deliver ang pagre-report na ito. Ganun po yun. Okay, so yan ngayon, katulad niyan, Gasi, magdi-December at ikaw ba'y bakunado na?
Bakunado na tayo, Sir Rosel. Kailangan natin yung mga laging nasa labas o kaya marami tayong ginagawa. Kailangan lagi tayong ready sa pandemya, humarap sa mga hamon ng pandemya.
Ayun. Pero may sinasabi ang administrasyon o mga schools na kahit bakunado ka, kung ayaw mo makipag face-to-face, pwede rin. At kung gusto mo naman na webinar lang, pwede rin. So ano mas preferred mo doon?
Para sa akin, kung bakunado ka na, mag face-to-face na lamang tayo. Kasi, kumbaga, may mga, depende talaga kasi sa estudyante. Para sa akin kasi, depende sa estudyante. Kahit ano namang uri ng pag-aaral yan, kung gusto mo talagang mag-aral, matututo ka. Nga lang, may mga iba't ibang hamon kang haharapin pagdating sa online class o kaya sa face-to-face classes. Pero sa aking personal na pananaw, mas gusto ko yung face-to-face classes kasi andyan yung personal na presensya ng mga kasama natin.
Ayun, tama.
Meron tayong kasamang magreklamo, meron tayong kasamang mag-aral. Kaysa naman online, mahirap yung makipag-usap sa cellphone o gadget.
Correct, no? So yun, tama yung mga kaibigan. Totoo yung sinasabi ni Gasi, kahit ako, iba yung face-to-face. Kasi, for example, meron kang alam na hindi. Halimbawa, for example, ang subjects is geometry, o kaya algebra. So merong mga proseso, merong mga formula na hindi kaya sa webinar. Mas iba yung face-to-face na maituturo ng profesor kung paano makukuha yung sagot. So ganun yun. Kasi ang hirap di ba? Kapag sa webinar, di ba, hindi mo makukuha yung solusyon kung paano, di ba?
Sabi nga ho sa iba kong mga balitang nabasa, inuna raw nila yung mga medical courses kasi sila yung crucial kumbaga na kailangan nila yung mga face-to-face learning na andun sila, maglalaboratory sila. Yun. So, sa amin ho, sa UE, kasalukuyan ng pinaplano yung paglulunsad ng face-to-face classes.
Ayun, sa totoo naman ho, lahat yan, baka by next year, ay gano'n na, mag face-to-face na. Mas maganda naman yon. Okay, so Gasi, hindi mo mababatiin, isa yung mga gusto mong batiin, ang mga katropa, yan, daddy mo, nanonood yata.
Unang-una, binabati ko ang aking ina, ang aking ama, at ang aking mga kasamahan dyan sa bahay, aking mga kamag-aral, at aking mga kaibigan. Magandang gabi ho.
Ayun. Okay, so yan mga kaibigan, at siguro magpapaalam na kami ni Gasi at abangan nyo na lang kanyang mga pag-uulat. Actually, kanina meron na siyang nireport, no? About sa istorya sa Region 5, no? Yun ay sa Sorsogon, ano? Tama ba? Sorsogon? So, yun. Pero abangan nyo pa yung ibang mga pag-uulat niya dito po sa Millennial Online TV. So, Gasi, magpaalam ko na sa ating mga viewers at tayo mag-extra na.
Kasalukuyan yung subaybayan ang Millennial Online TV sa anumang programa, mag-like, mag-share, mag-subscribe ho kayo at kami naman ho patuloy na maglilingkod ng mga balita, patuloy maglilingkod ng entertainment para naman ho sa inyo.
Ayun. Okay, so mga kaibigan, pansamantala magpapaalam na kami ni Gasi Sarip sa oras na alas 7:04 po ng gabi, Philippine Standard Time. At muli, maraming salamat po sa lahat ng pumunta dito po sa year-end ng Millennial Online TV, partikular doon po kay Vice Mayor Aspirant ng Montalban Rizal, kay Kuya Crisco, at ganyan din kay Councilor Aspirant Ambet Bautista ng Malabon City. At ganyan din kanina nagpunta rin po sa atin si Councilor Edward Nolasco po, no, ng Potrero Malabon ng District 1, kung di ako nagkakamali, tama ba, Consi? Na maraming salamat, although may pupuntahan ka pa pala at nainip ka sa akin dahil meron tayong ini-interview, hindi na kita naisalang, maybe mga sa susunod na araw, Consi, kahit na hindi year-end, sana balikan mo ko rito para gusto ko makapanayam kita ng live, no, dito sa Millennial Online TV, no? At siyempre pasalamat din tayo kay Barangay Kagawad Sani Dadal Pineda ng Tugatog Malabon na nagpunta rin dito kasama kanyang may bahay, si Madam Estela Pineda, at siyempre yung kanyang sidekick, si Ipe, si Boss Ipe, at siyempre ngayon susunod yata yung kanyang anak na si Sara, at siguro malamang kasama siyempre yung asawa, hindi naman mapapaiwan niya si Boss Owi, no? Yun, kahit siya mapunta nakabuntot yun Okay, sa ngalan po at maraming salamat din pala kay Boss Rapi Rico, no, at kay Bambo Garcia at kay Pep Messina, no. Si Boss Rapi Rico po ay taga San Juan City, no. Maraming salamat sa iyo, Boss Rapi. At sa lahat po na sumubaybay ngayong araw na ito, Disyembre 16, taong 2021, araw po ng Huwebes. At muli po magbabalik kami bukas para sa Friday edition ng programang Tropa. Sa ngalan po ni Joshua Sumulat Baltaw, ako po inyong naging kasama at nakakwentuhan ka-jamming, kakosa, ka-dabarkats, ka-tropa, Rosel Lopez at siyempre kasama rin natin si Gasi Sarit. Magandang gabi Pilipinas at mapayapang magdamag.
Hanap mo ba ay unwind ventures? Tara nang mamangha sa mga tanawin. Ano man ang iyong travel goals? Dadalhin namin kayo. Sa unwind ventures at saya. Dito lang sa Wow Biyahe. Kaya wow, di ba?
Abangan dito lang sa Millennial Online TV. Ikaw ba'y nag-iisa? Nalulungkot? Dahil iniwan at ipinagpalit? Niloko ng iyong minamahal? Kung ngayon, i-type sa inyong mga cellphone, Facebook o YouTube man ang Millennial Online TV. Dahil nasa Millennial Online TV na ang online haralista ng bagong milenyo, si Randel Villados.
Naninigas ang aking katawan kapag umikot ng plaka.
At haharanahin kayo ni Randel ng iba't ibang awitin para maibsan ang iyong inip at kalungkutan kahit nasaan man kayo.
Hanggang sa tumanda. Come on! Kung tayo'y matanda na, sana'y di tayo magbago.
At pwede rin kayong makiduet kay Randel tuwing Sabado ng hapon. Tutok na! Tawag na mga milenyo!
Araw-araw ikaw ang gusto kong kasama. Buhay ko'y kumpleto na tuwing nandito ka sa tabi ko o aking giliw.
Ikaw ba'y barangay, pangunahing unit ng pamahalang lokal kung saan dito pinag-uusapan ang bawat sinalon ng mga residente ng bawat barangay. Dito rin pinag-uusapan ng mga piling halal na opisyal na barangay ang mga proyekto para sa kanilang barangay. Kumustahin natin ang panunungkulan ni Kapitan dito sa Dala Barangay sa Millennial Online TV Worldwide, ang katropa ng bawat barangay.
At tinatapos ang ating pagpupulong. Maraming salamat po sa inyong pagdalo at tapos na po ang ating session. Hanggang na po tayo.
Mga pangyayaring naganap sa ating kapaligiran, mga balita sa buong isang linggo, ihimayin, iisa-isahin, dito sa Balitaktakan, aarangkada, kasama si Brian Enyosa, dito lang sa Millennial Online TV.
Nais mo bang guminhawa ang iyong pakiramdam?
Kung ikaw ay may sipon, ubo, lagnat at iba pang nararamdaman, lalo na ang sakit ng katawan, narito ng Yasmag Magnesium Therapy Oil. Ang Yasmag Magnesium Therapy Oil ay nakatutulong na ibsan ang iyong nararamdaman sa pamamagitan ng pagpahid sa apektadong parte ng katawan, gaya ng noo, balikat, tuhod at kung anuman ang masakit na parte ng iyong katawan. Panoorin ang mga testimonials ng gumamit ng Yasmag.
Yan po, ginagamit niya. Siya po ay isa sa aking mga testimony.
Ako, si Destino Francisco, ay gumagamit ng Yasmag na siyang nakapagpalakad sa akin. Kaya kayo, mga kaibigan ko at kakilala, ay pinapayuhan kong gumamit ng product na ito.
Isa sa ating testimony, ikukwento po niya sa inyo yung kanyang result nung siya ay 1 linggo nang nilalagnat at giniginaw ng hihina.
Hi, ako po si Rina Liliantos, 29 years old, taga Sariaya, Quezon po. Nangyari po sa akin, itong mga nakaraang araw po ay hindi ko po maintindihan yung pakiramdam ko, gawa pong ang sakit po sobra ng likod ko, nilalagnat ako, tapos po ay hindi lang po 1 linggo ang nararamdaman ko. Simula po nung July 30 hanggang itong araw, hanggang nung mga nakaraang araw. Yun lang po, nawala lang po ng dahil sa magnesium.
Paano ginawa mo?
Ang ginawa lang po sa akin ay ipinahinaplas po sa akin likod kung saang parte ng katawan ang masakit. Tapos po ay hinilot lang po ako. At hanggang po pagpawisan ako sa pagkahilot na may magnesium. Ayun lang po, sunod-sunod po ang paglagay kung saan banda ang may masakit. At yun nga po, ilang araw lang sa paggamit yun ng magnesium, ako mismo, sarili ko, ramdam ko ang pagbabago sa aking katawan. Dahil po simula nga po nung July 30 hanggang itong itong mga nakaraang araw lang, hindi ako halos makatayo dahil sa sobrang sakit ng aking likod.
Ako po si Leslie. First time ko po mag-try nitong Yasmag Magnesium Therapy. Ang una ko pong naramdaman ang bango niya lang hapin, nakaka-relax ng katawan, and then yung sakit na iniinda ko sa puso, yung sakit-sakit, wala naman ako sakit sa puso, pero yung mga kirot-kirot nawala niya, instant nawala, na tagal ko nang iniinda. And then hindi siya malagkit ipahid.
Binaigting, binalakas ang bagong news online TV ng bagong milenyo. Millennial Online TV, ang katropa mo sa pagbabalita.
Mga katropa, ako ang inyong lingkod, Brian Anyosa. Samahan po ninyo ako sa panibago nating programa dito sa Millennial Online TV, ang Balitaktakan, kung saan pag-uusapan natin ang lahat ng mga balitang bumabandera sa isang buong linggo at mga impormasyong dapat ninyong malaman. Paano kami mapanood? I-type lang sa inyong mga Facebook at YouTube account ang Millennial Online TV. Ano pang hinihintay mo, katropa? Like, subscribe, at share na!
Mga katropa, ako po si Randel Villados, ang online naranista ng bagong milenyo ng Millennial Online TV, na nag-aanyaya sa inyo na makikanta, makisaya, at tumutok sa lahat ng programa ng Millennial Online TV. I-type lamang sa inyong Facebook at YouTube ang Millennial Online TV. Nood na, mga katropa!
Mga katropa, ako po si Gazi Sarip, ang inyong tagapaghatid ng balita sa bagong milenyo, na nag-aanyaya sa inyo na tunghayan ang aking mga pag-uulat at tumutok sa lahat ng programa dito sa Millennial Online TV.
I-type lamang sa inyong Facebook at YouTube ang Millennial Online TV. Nood na mga katropa!
Mga katropa, ako po inyong lingkod, si Rosel Lopez, ang inyong katropa, ang inyong kabarangay ng bagong milenyo. Abangan po ang aking mga tatalakayin na mga kaganapan dito sa ating bansa. At syempre, abangan nyo rin ang gagawin nating pangungumusta sa panunungkulan ni Kapitan sa ating Dalaw Barangay. At syempre, ay tunghayan nyo po ang lahat ng programa ng Millennial Online TV. I-type lamang po sa inyong mga cellphone sa Facebook at YouTube, Millennial Online TV. Okay mga katropa?
Pinaigting, pinalakas ang bagong news online TV ng bagong milenyo. Millennial Online TV, ang katropa mo sa pagbabalita.
Now,
talakayin, rebisahin, opinyon, paganggakin, aksyonan, kasama si Rosel Lopez, ang inyong katropa, dito lang sa Millennial Online TV, ang katropa mo sa pagbabalita. Pinaigting, pinalakas ang bagong news online TV ng bagong milenyo. Millennial Online TV, ang katropa mo sa pagbabalita.
Mga kababayan, ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas.
Kayang magiliw, telas ang sinakanan, alam ng puso, sa dikit mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, tuyag ka ng magiping, sa mandulupin, di ka pasisigil, sa nagatak tutok sa simoy at sa langit mo bagaw, ay hinatang tulad, awit sa pagkayang minamahal, ang isang ng matawad mo'y tagumpay na nag-iindig, ang bituin at araw niya kailan pang ay di magtitingin, lumalang araw ng walhabit pagsinta, buhay langit sa piling mo, ang ligaya na pagkay mag-api, at mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Sa lahat ng bumubuo ng Millennial Online TV at sa lahat po ng sumusuporta, maraming salamat po. Millennial Online TV is now signing off.